Yep, it is. Got everybody situated. Good morning, everybody. I'm one that, through years of practice as a law and a judge, and now here in Congress, so I may be one of the few Congress people that believe in starting on time. And therefore, I'm sure that others will join us, but in deference to our panelists and the work that all of us have, I would like for us to be able to go forward. My colleague, Ted Deutsch, may be along a little later. He's in a hearing, as you well know, some of you. We are in the period where there are a lot of markups and appropriations measures are ongoing. So this is high season for us. I'd like to thank all of you for coming here today on this briefing on ISIS's involvement in human trafficking and the violent treatment of women and girls. I'd like to just lay a quick footnote there. Our concern for human trafficking worldwide is certainly a factor, and certainly as ISIS does, Boko Haram is doing the same kind of thing. But I do not wish to confuse the hearings. I just wish to heighten the significance of this issue that many of us have been working on before ISIS came to light. I have worked with the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, and a large component of our human rights portfolio has been dealing with, and I have for the last 16 years, human trafficking. And it's kind of interesting because while this is critically important, I can remember holding my own briefing in Florida in my constituency, and it was remarkable how many women were being trafficked in Florida, and there were those in Florida that didn't want to hear that, you know, we're sanitized, and therefore it does not occur. I'd like to thank Ted Deutsch for co-hosting this event with me and for his dedication and to democracy and human rights. And of course, I want to extend a warm welcome to all of the panelists and thank them for their dedication to such an immensely important issue. ISIS has clearly demonstrated that their thirst for tyranny cannot be quelled. We know this to be true from any number of actions this heinous group has taken. But most disturbingly, we know this to be true because ISIS continues to systematically kidnap and enslave women and girls. These enslaved women and girls, some as young as 10-year-olds and perhaps younger, are treated as the spoils of war. They are often used as incentives for recruits to take up arms with ISIS, or are given to soldiers as prizes, at which time we know what happens to them. They are raped and beaten and subjugated. This system of degradation, ISIS argues, is sanctioned under Islamic law, an argument that is as bankrupt as it is sickening. I applaud the 120 senior Muslim scholars and imams who have written an open letter to the senior members of ISIS, making it clear that any reading of the Quran that advocates for the enslavement and rape of women and girls is not at all a reflection of their valued book. Of course, as important as it is that we never lose sight of the fact that ISIS does not speak for the Muslim community as a whole, it is equally, if not more important, in the more immediate future, that we dedicate our efforts to saving and protecting the women and girls who stand helplessly and too often hopelessly in the path of these groups' horrible destruction. Again, I thank all of you for your interest in this truly important issue. The enslavement and rape of these women and girls is a terrible and pressing humanitarian crisis that, in my view, we must address immediately. We're very pleased this morning to have with us several panelists, and in an effort to cut down on time, I'll allow that they each introduce themselves and go forward in a manner that they see fit. But just briefly, Kendra Heidman is with the Middle East program, and Wilson Center. Matthew Barber is a student at the University of Chicago, focusing on Islamic studies, and Yazidim. And Murad Ismail is a Yazidi American for the Yazidi community and a member of the Sinjar crisis management team. All of us saw those horrible events. You know, I want to share with you very briefly, and I'll stop. Young lady seated up here on the front row, Lolly Mamo, works with me, as do several others that are here. Mike in the back, Jen up here, Daggity, Mona is out there. There's Mona over there. And I thank them as well. But Lolly and I, long before this ISIS group came up, began along with Jen's mother, her name is Marlene Kaufman. We took the lead on studying the issue of Iraqi refugees. And we found some very disturbing facts and presented them back here in the Congress. One of the things that fascinated me, aside from the number of Iraqis that were in Syria and Lebanon at that time, and fewer were in Jordan than are there now, coming out of the Syrian crisis. But one of the things that struck me was that there was an encampment of about 300,000 Christians close to the Iraqi-Jordanian border. And I would come back, now mind you, let me make it very clear, I'm perceived as a liberal Democrat. And I recognize these kinds of issues are bipartisan, and I work in a bipartisan fashion in an effort to try to remedy many of these things in my role as a congressperson. So what I'm about to say is a bit partisan, because a lot of my friends who are Christians, and I brought this information back to them, they did not do one damn thing or utter one single word, and Christians were being killed and were being encamped at that time. Now, most of those people that I'm talking about are Republican, and if you're a Republican and I've offended you, it's deliberate. So it's, we don't have any added problem in that regard. But in deference to the lady, let's begin with Kendra, if you gentlemen don't mind, and let you go forward. Thank you all so very much for being here with us this morning.
Great. Well, thank you, Representative Hastings, and thank you to Representative Deutsch as well for hosting this important briefing. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to all of you today, and I'll pass it on to Colleen Thompson for speaking. I wanted to, first of all, before we discuss the Yazidi women in Iraq, take a step back and discuss the beginning of ISIL's mistreatment of women, which began in Syria much earlier and which continues today still. So I'll review ISIL's treatment of women and girls in Syria, the discriminatory restrictions on women in Syria, including the use of all-female brigades to enforce such restrictions, the targeting of professional, educated women, and the consequences that such violence has had on the victims and their communities.
Is your mic on? There you go.
This is better. Okay. So although world attention has become focused on ISIL's treatment of women in the past several months, these atrocities actually started much earlier in Syria. Before ISIL targeted Yazidi women in Iraq, ISIL was targeting Alawite, Shia, Christian, and Kurdish women in Syria. According to some reports, Sunni women in Raqqa, Syria, believed to be the capital of ISIL's self-declared caliphate, have also been subjected to the same abusive treatment as other minority groups. By now, there are countless reports of ISIL's mistreatment of these women, as Congressman Hastings said earlier, including accounts of ISIL's abduction and rape of women and girls, its use of girls as sex slaves, and its forced marriages. The group has set up brothels and makeshift slave markets in Syria to sell women and girls into slavery. These brothels are run by women, primarily British women, who have traveled to Syria to join ISIL and are part of the all-female Al-Qansa Brigade, which I'll discuss in a moment. The women and girls held by ISIL who have not been married off or sold are being raped in rooms of horror by multiple fighters who return from the battlefront and receive these girls as rewards or spoils of war. These victims are reported to be as young as 8 years old in some cases. The UN's most recent report, released in late March, describes the sexual violence perpetrated by ISIL as a tactic of war. The report states conflict-related sexual violence is a core element of the ideology and operation of extremist groups like ISIL. It noted a significant increase in the number of cases of sexual violence in Syria, with women being trafficked from Iraq and sold in markets in Syria. Hundreds, probably thousands of Yazidi women and girls have been transferred throughout Iraq and into Syria and brought to various holding cells, including prisons, to be raped or sold at these markets. Hundreds of Shia women and a few dozen Christian women have been trafficked as well. In these slave markets in Raqqa, Syria, and Mosul, Iraq, women and girls have been sold for as little as $25 and in some cases as much as $2,000. Some observers think ISIL's human trafficking is intended more to recruit new members to join the group and demoralize local communities than it is to generate revenue for the group. Along with the physical violence ISIL perpetrates against women, it also seeks forced marriages between its fighters, whether Arab or foreign, and local Syrian girls. There are a number of reports from early 2014 showing an increase in the number of marriages between ISIL fighters and girls in Raqqa and Aleppo, Syria. Activists say these marriages typically only last a few months, in some cases even less time, because of fighters' movements to different battlefronts. Early marriages are also on the rise because parents are fearful their daughters will be forced into these marriages. Sometimes parents just keep their daughters inside their homes to avoid them. ISIL has also set up marriage bureaus in different parts of its controlled territory for widows and unmarried women, including foreign women, to marry jihadist fighters. ISIL's treatment of women, including its abuse, abduction, rape, trafficking, and forced marriages, are well documented. The UN, in a report investigating war crimes in Syria, said the killings and acts of sexual violence perpetrated by ISIL constitute war crimes and crimes against humanity. Women in Syria face not only this horrific and inhuman treatment, but they also face discriminatory restrictions on their dress, movement, and other freedoms. Even before ISIL's official takeover of Raqqa in January 2014, it had started imposing restrictions that require women to wear the abaya, which is a full-length robe, the niqab, which is a veil that covers all of the face except the eyes, and gloves. In some cases, women are also forced to wear a double-layer veil that covers their eyes as well. ISIL imposed these discriminatory measures on women and girls that included them requiring them to move in public with only if they had a male guardian. It prohibited them from attending school and from working outside the home as well. Restrictions included prohibitions on jeans, close-fitting clothing, high heels, makeup, among other things. And schools and hospitals have been segregated in places throughout Syria. Some schools have been shut down in order to bring curricula in line with the ISIL's religious rules. Women continue to be harassed for going outside their homes without a male guardian, and some women don't leave their houses at all. One female Syrian refugee told of a neighbor who was a widow and her 3 young children who died during heavy fighting in Raqqa because the widow was afraid to leave her home because of the prohibition on traveling outside the home without a male guardian. Another female refugee said she heard stories of her female neighbors who had been raped by ISIL fighters or lashed because they weren't wearing the niqab. These restrictions are also imposed on female doctors who are required to wear the niqab and gloves and treat only female patients. A female doctor who escaped Raqqa in August 2014 spoke of how strict ISIL was in monitoring female doctors' clothing and women who were admitted into the hospital, telling of a time when an ISIL guard covered a woman's face who was trying to receive CPR. The woman later died because of it. Very few female doctors remain in ISIL-controlled areas. In November 2014, ISIL also announced that women under the age of 45 would not be allowed to travel outside Raqqa, and they could only travel in the case of medical emergency or even then in the direction of Turkey. Such harsh rules violate women and girls' human rights and limit their ability to carry out daily activities. According to a Human Rights Watch report, this highlighted how restrictions also constitute a form of gender-based discrimination that is prohibited under several international treaties to which Syria is a party, including the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. Shortly after ISIL took Raqqa and after it had already been imposing these discriminatory measures, the group established the Al-Qansa and the al-Rayyan brigades, which are all-female brigades that enforce Sharia law and police checkpoints in ISIL-controlled territory. The Al-Qansa brigade arrests women in Raqqa who don't obey ISIL's strict brand of Sharia law, including the mandate that they be fully covered and accompanied by a male guardian. There's a similar brigade in Mosul, Iraq. The al-Rayyan brigade is tasked with inspecting women at checkpoints leading into different ISIL-controlled areas. The women ensure those who are wearing the full Islamic dress required by ISIL are actually women and not men being snuck in to fight against ISIL. The women in these brigades have an active role in repressing women in Syria and in carrying out punishment against women who don't obey ISIL's restrictions. This includes reports of savage beatings on the streets of Raqqa. 2 former Al-Qansa brigade members who recently escaped from Raqqa said women not wearing the abaya would receive the standard 40 lashes, while women who were trying to escape would get 60 lashes. Women caught breastfeeding in public are subjected to a barbaric device called the biter, which pinches an area of exposed skin and has caused women to be admitted into the hospital. The women in these brigades are the enforcers of restrictions that oppress women, and it's an example of ISIL using women to control women in a strategic way. The brigades include mostly foreign women and primarily British women in an attempt to undercut the perception that women are less free under ISIL and to recruit new foreign women to join. Aqsa Mahmoud, a 20-year-old woman from Glasgow, is believed to be the leader of the group. She fled to Syria in 2013. Women in the brigade also help search for wives for foreign fighters, and according to some reports, unmarried women are asked to wear a white scarf under their niqab so women in the brigade can identify them and find their families harassing them, so they'll marry ISIL fighters. Approximately 10% of Western ISIL recruits are female. As of March this year, reports estimate that at least 60 British women have traveled to ISIL, including the 3 highly publicized London schoolgirls who traveled in February of this year. And more than 500 Western women in total have migrated to ISIL-controlled areas. The women who join ISIL do so for a number of reasons, and usually for the same reasons that men join the group. The opportunity to devote their lives to their religion and live in what they see as a true Islamic state. The opportunity to escape alienation in their home countries. The opportunity to help in humanitarian ways, and the opportunity for adventure or romance. Women see their roles, whether in the home or on the streets, repressing and punishing women, as a vital part of supporting what they perceive as the fulfillment of the ultimate Islamic state. While ISIL is using women to control and oppress other women, the group is also targeting women it perceives as a threat, particularly educated professional women. There have been several articles in the past few months about ISIL executing educated women, but the phenomenon is unfortunately not new. The group has killed numerous professional women in both Syria and Iraq, including human rights activists, politicians, doctors, and lawyers, among others. In August 2014, ISIL beheaded a female dentist in El Mayadeen, Syria, because she continued to treat patients of both sexes. At least 10 women in Mosul have been killed for speaking out against the group as well. And in just the first few weeks of this year, there are reports that 3 female lawyers have been executed. According to a report from the Syrian Network for Human Rights in March of this year, some 159 women have been killed in Syria since the beginning of 2014.
The group has also arrested 520 women since the beginning of 2013, and they remain in their custody. Because of these targeted executions and other barbaric acts like public beheadings, the UN said ISIL is showing a, quote, monstrous disregard for human life. The women and girls who are victims of ISIL's brutality suffer from wide-ranging negative consequences that extend beyond the physical abuse. I know Murad will speak about this a little bit more. Women who are raped are shamed in their communities. Those who become pregnant and their children are often ostracized. Women who are held captive are fearful of rape, and as a result, an unknown number of women and girls have committed suicide. Zakia Haki, the first woman judge in Iraq, contributed a piece to the Wilson Center Middle East program publication. She said that young girls who become pregnant and have no other options sometimes go back to ISIL because the group can provide security and financial support. She also notes some of these victims become perpetrators of violence themselves. Over the past several months, we've heard about a number of women and girls who have been able to escape ISIL captivity. Numbers range from 200 to 400 women and girls. I think Murad probably has a better update than I do for that. Many who escape are purchased by someone at a slave market who buys them with the intention of freeing them and returning them to their families. Activists say one man smuggled out nearly 40 women, but he had to flee the country because he was fearful of ISIL retaliation. If men are caught buying and freeing women, they'll be killed. Activists say one man tried to buy 10 women, but was caught and killed by ISIL. Any long-term solutions to the crises in Syria and Iraq need to address the women and girls who have suffered under ISIL. Vian Takil, a Yazidi member of parliament in Iraq, spoke at the Wilson Center in December 2014, saying that humanitarian aid was needed urgently. Given that much of the Iraqi government's resources and capacity are being used to fight ISIL, she requested greater assistance from the international community. It's important to continue to discuss this issue and give it prominence as we are here today, but even more important is continuing to work with organizations and communities on the ground that have the capacities and resources to help these women and girls. I'll turn it over to one of my colleagues.
Good morning. Thanks Congressman Hastings, and thanks to Congressman Deutsch for hosting this event. It's a very important event. And to bring this issue of the Yazidi woman and the women in general into the light. This issue is very close to our hearts as a Yazidi community, and it's very close to the heart of people who really seen the evil and the treatment of this terrorist group against women in general, and in particular against the Yazidi women. I will try to talk in general about what happened back in August today, in the 21st century. What happened really in August 3rd, there was a massive genocide against the Yazidi people with intention to eradicate the Yazidi people from the face of the planet. ISIL had one intention when they came, is to kill everyone or force everyone to convert to Islam. People really did not have any choices. They had only two choices, whether you convert to Islam or you die. Yazidis did not have a third choice to leave the area, only two choices. They came into Sinjar with massive force, and they ran over the security forces who did not resist. And they went village by village, street by street, killing men over the age of 14, 15, enslaving women and children. Most of the men they got to for the first day, they killed them. And our estimate is about 4,000 to 5,000 men have been killed since that. Of course, the killing event in Kocho, where the whole village was surrounded by ISIL, a village with population of 1,700, about 60 people. And ISIL brought all the men inside that village to 4 trenches just outside the village and massacred them. Later that was confirmed by the imagery that more than 400 men over the age of 16 were killed in masses. Every woman and every child in that village was enslaved and was taken. Girls over the age of sometimes 12 and 11 were taken away from their families and were given as slaves and used for sex to the fighters, in cases sometimes forced into forceful marriage. The killing was really was just, if you are a Yazidi, you would be killed, and that did not prevent killing of even disabled people. My disabled cousin inside one of the villages was killed by ISIL as he was trying to get to the mountain. We have more than 15 people, elderly and disabled, were burned alive inside one of the temples in Sinjar. All the disabled people and elderly people who could not escape from the Yazidi villages were massacred in Sinjar. And only after freeing half of Sinjar, the northern side of Sinjar, we've already discovered more than 9 mass graves. These are the graves where ISIL brought people, civilians, in many cases women and children and men, elderly. They brought them to these sites and executed them, cutting off their heads, shooting them, killing them in very heinous ways. Of course, the killing was not the only part of it. The enslavement of the women and children, that really broke the heart of every Yazidi person in the world. When I went back to Iraq back in January, in January of this year and in December of last year, I met with many of these women who managed to escape. As a first hand who've been subject to this type of atrocities, when you see this woman, there's no words can express the extent of pain. There's really no single word or a sentence that can explain how much suffering those women have seen, from rape by multiple fighters, from physical abuses, from forcing them to marriage. A child that I met at age of 14 forced to marriage with an ISIL person over the age of 60, who first took her and told her, "I will be your father, I will take care of you." And only a few nights after that, he raped her. Another cancer survivor, a woman who had cancer. She was taken by multiple people, more than 3 people, and she was raped with her 2 sisters. While her father, her mother, her brother, 3 of them were killed in mass graves in Sinjar. We are talking about more than 1,500 women who've been enslaved and who've been all forced to sexual slavery in a way or another. We have more than 5,000 hostages that will be, some of the men that ISIL spared their lives, but mostly women with their children that ISIL took. In fact, ISIL, after taking the families, killing the men and taking the families, what they did, they took the boys, so the males over the age of 10 or 11, and they put them inside training camps in Raqqa. We have at least 2 training camps in Raqqa. One of them has 300 Yazidi children, and the other one has 90 Yazidi children who are being trained right now to be terrorists in the future. So not only they killed our men, they enslaved our women, but they took our children to be future ammunition for terrorism. ISIL also destroyed more than 19 temples in Sinjar, attacking the Yazidi faith as a religion that is rooted in the history of Mesopotamia for more than 4,000 years. Now we see it getting wiped out in Mesopotamia by a terrorist group, while the world is doing little to prevent that. Some of the women I met included a child, age of 12. She came back. She was raped by 3 people at least. When she came back, most of the male in her family were executed, and she had no place to go with her family but an abandoned building, a structure in the city of Depok where they didn't even have enough support to purchase food or to have clothes. I meet some women who came back from captivity. After being in captivity for 3 months, they still had the same clothes on. And I asked one woman why you don't change your clothes. She said, I don't want to change it because I want to remember what has happened to my family, what has happened to my brothers who were executed, to my mother, to my sisters who I saw them getting raped. And she said, I don't have money to purchase clothes for that. Most of the Yazidi women are after taking them, so anyone over the age of 12, those who were enslaved, most of them are in Syria right now, in many cases inside the ISIL camps or posts, or like their guarding posts where they are used for sex. As the fighters come back, they use them for sex. And that came from a phone call I had with a hostage near Sinjar Mountain when she called me. They put 6 of us inside the village of Tel Qasab, one of the villages southern Sinjar. They put us inside this house, and every time they come back from the fight where they are fighting with the Yazidi fighters on the mountain, they came back and they are rewarded to have sex with us. And there was a child at the age of 15 among that group. These numbers are mostly, as I said, in Raqqa. Many of them are in Raqqa, Aleppo, Shaddadiya, Deir ez-Zor, different places within the Syrian territories. They've taken as far as to Ramadi, to Anbar province in Iraq, and there are some reports that they may have been taken them to different countries, such as Afghanistan, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, other countries, Gulf countries, that they may have already been sold as slaves. Just before coming here 3 days, we received a phone call from 2 Yazidi women inside the city of Raqqa. They are offered for sale by their Moroccan terrorist, a Moroccan terrorist who traveled to Raqqa to fight, who is keeping the woman and offering them for sale. Whoever pays more will get the woman. The cases that we've seen as Sinjar Crisis Group since the beginning of this crisis, we formed Sinjar Crisis Group with Matthew, with other people within the Yazidi community here in the US and in Iraq. We sort of saw the problem unfolding. We saw it as they were taking women in Sinjar, putting them in the trucks, and then taking them to different places, to Mosul, and then distributing them. At one point in Bahaj, in the city of Bahaj, close to Sinjar, I was talking to a woman, and she told me, we are 198 Yazidi women here inside this house, and there are people lined up outside, 10 people lined up outside, and they have money in their hand to buy us. And that's exactly what happened. That woman who told me that this might be the last call that you will receive from us, that was exactly the last call that I received from her. That was not enough. Inside that same house, ISIL forced women, told them, you go take shower, and after you take shower, you will be sold. 2 of the women inside that, they cut their veins, and they committed suicide inside that exact house in Bahaj. And after that, there was an uprising by the woman, by the Yazidi woman there. ISIL shot 2 more, and killed them on the spot and threw their bodies just outside the house, while taking the rest for enslavement. We also have so many reports from the women inside those places who are held, where Yazidi women were drinking gasoline on a daily basis just to die in order not to endure this pain. Yazidi women from inside the city of Tel Afar, dumping themselves off the mosques of the buildings, so they are not raped on a daily basis. Exact same thing happened in Mosul. So the numbers we are giving, the 5,000 numbers of captives, we've been following up this number. They are real numbers. Those are people with faces, people with life, with families, people that when you go sit with them, there's nothing that will explain the way you feel. You just feel that in the 21st century, that a whole community, religious community that has been so peaceful throughout its history, that been massacred in this way, in this violent way, that been killed on their religious identity for absolutely no reason but for being Yazidi. It's unbelievable the amount of feelings and emotions that you will have when you sit with these children. I met three Yazidi children who came back. They've lost every single person in their families. One family lost 16 people, between cousins and between close family members. Another family from the town where I'm from Khanasor, every single person in that family, about 60 people, that will include aunts, cousin, everyone. Only 7 people made it. Everybody else was enslaved or was killed. So in 21st century, and while this all unfolding in front of us, a massive genocide, and the world is really doing little. What can we do for the Yazidi women to be protected in Nineveh? That's a very important question, because it's not only the 1,500 women who've been enslaved. It's every Yazidi woman now in the world, or in the Iraq, Middle East, knows that she is a subject of slavery, that she is a material that at some point in the future she will be used for sex, that she will be traded like materials from one person to another. Every single Yazidi woman feels that. I met a woman, a Yazidi journalist in Erbil. She told me, I could be one of these women. I could be one of these women by the Islamic State or by the future Islamic group that will come. So we need to provide protection to the Yazidi women so they are not felt they will be subject for sex in the future. We need, as international community, and that's a request of every person that I spoke to from Iraq, that some sort of international protection must be provided to the minorities, to the Christians, to the Yazidis, to the people of Nineveh Plain. Because if we do not provide international protection, our women, Christians women, minorities women will be sold in markets, and we will see this again after 5 years from now, after 3 years from now. This must be stopped, and this will not be stopped by the locals, because the locals that we coexisted with for thousands of years, they turned against us. The government that had more than 16,000 security forces in Sinjar, they pulled out from Sinjar without shooting a single bullet for the Yazidis. And that is the truth. For the Yazidis, for the Christians, they were not defended in Iraq. And probably they will not be defended unless the international community reaches out to these people and protect them. With that, the humanitarian situation that also, as we spoke of, the children and the women when they come back, there's really no safety network for them. There's no social network for them. A woman will come back that's been raped by multiple people. She doesn't have $5 to purchase food. She doesn't have money to buy clothes. They live in tents. When it was cold back in December and January when I was there, these people did not have even a heater inside those tents or these abandoned buildings. A lot of the tents there had mold inside. So when you see that, you just feel so hopeless and so sad. When the women come back, they not only need, they also need social support, and the Yazidi community really have been very accepting. In our culture, we never accepted people to, so the woman will not be accepted after she would convert to Islam, but now the Yazidi community has transformed and have been very accepting to the Yazidi women when they come back. We never heard about any cases where the women have not been accepted, but we've heard about cases that when the women get pregnant, sometimes they are like, it's been already 8 months, they've been pregnant for 6 months, and they decided not to come back because it's just very difficult. Because some of them have to walk for more than 100 miles to get to safety to the border of Turkey or to Iraq. So it makes it more difficult for this woman to come back. And actually, in fact, sometimes ISIL, we've heard a report that ISIL is doing abortion for the women because they don't want them to get pregnant. They want to continue to use them for sex. So the other really important thing that the women, when they come back, they feel they have some dignity, a human dignity, and they are not left behind in that way. Some social support network need to be provided for these women for the long term. But it's not only the woman. As I said, every Yazidi man and every Yazidi child, every Yazidi woman, we are all traumatized. Everybody is. Everybody is. You've lost your friend. Everybody of us lost hundreds of his friends or her friends. Have lost family members. The whole community needs support. It's not just the woman. The whole community needs support. Thank you. I give it to Matt.
Thanks, Murad. I'm very grateful to Congressman Hastings and Jennifer Kaufman for organizing this event and allowing us to speak about this extremely important topic. Now, I think it's very important, the contributions that we've just heard. Kendra has highlighted the fact that it's not just Yazidi women that have suffered under IS, but it's all women, including a great deal of Muslim women who are pressured by IS jihadists to marry fighters. However, we're speaking the most about Yazidi women today. We're focusing on them because this community has been targeted in a way that no other community has. There's been a kind of violence and an enslavement project that this community has been subjected to that extends beyond the behavior that IS uses when it approaches other people groups. And there are some theological reasons for that on the part of how IS conceptualizes its role. I'm not going to go into at the moment for the sake of time, but I can discuss it more in the Q&A if anyone needs more background on that. However, I think it's very important to understand that this project was not an incidental instance of opportunistic rape that accompanies any scenario of instability and warfare in the world, but it was actually a premeditated strategy. And I was able to get a sense of this when I was living in Dohuk when this scenario unfolded. Dohuk is a city 30 miles north of Mosul in northern Iraq. And on August 3rd, as Sinjar was attacked and Yazidi refugees or displaced people began to pour into my area and I interviewed them, I noticed a pattern of people speaking about missing female family members and this pervasive fear that we have to get our female family members to safety because they're carrying women away. And as time went on, people began to report to me that they were receiving calls from female family members who had been kidnapped and whose cell phones were still with them. And they were calling people, calling friends. I was speaking to distraught women who were getting calls from friends saying, we're inside a truck, we're being carried away, we don't know to where. And they still had their cell phone with them. Now I spoke to Kurdish Muslim residents of Sinjar who also survived the situation. And they were eyewitnesses who reported to me that as they tried to flee down the mountain, along with their Yazidi neighbors, during the initial attack on August 3rd, IS fighters stopped the convoys of fleeing cars, would separate people out by religion, and would tell the Muslims to go back to Sinjar city and wait. The Yazidis, however, were separated by gender, men from women, and these Muslims reported seeing the Yazidi women being loaded onto empty trucks that the fighters had brought with them upon that initial campaign. So this confirmed for me the fact that this entire operation was a premeditated strategy and not just the kind of opportunistic rape that we know always coincides with war. And this is something that's incredibly traumatic because we have a free people, a people that are not accustomed to enslavement, that have been enslaved. I think this is something unprecedented in my generation. I've never seen anything like this. Now, what I would like to focus on is the political response and some of our activities following this disaster. I think there's enough information out there for any who want to do research. They can find excellent reports on what the women are subjected to, how the character of this campaign of rape and enslavement look. If you need any resources, I recommend reading Amnesty International's report, Escape from Hell, and Human Rights Watch's recent report that just came out maybe a week ago. I believe it's called ISIS Escapees Describe Systematic Rape. Those two reports are excellent. Now, what's really important to understand, I think, is that there are a few political problems that are preventing this situation from resolving. And this has to do with internal political tensions inside Kurdistan province. And it's important that we understand these because this has a direct bearing on the future of these women who have been subjected to this violence and to the resolution of the entire situation. Now, as Murad mentioned, this is a very, very true thing and very tragic thing. On August 3rd, as the jihadists approached Sinjar Mountain, Yazidis and Sinjar were abandoned by the Kurdish forces, the Peshmerga military forces, that were stationed there to protect the mountain. They fled before the jihadists reached the mountain. They did not defend for even a single day. As Murad mentioned, not a single shot was fired. If they had stayed for one day, just one day, people could have been evacuated and we wouldn't be facing this enslavement crisis. As it was, the troops withdrew, Yazidis were attacked, civilians were attacked, people were carried. A deep sense of betrayal on the part of the Yazidis vis-a-vis the Kurdish leadership, the Kurdistan Regional Government, the KRG, and particularly the ruling KDP party, which is the president's party, which has jurisdiction in the western part of Kurdistan province, and which had administrative responsibility over Sinjar, even though it's not contiguous with the rest of Kurdistan province. Now, on this side, after I came back to the US and began to work with Murad, and we continued to work with Yazidis in northern Iraq, who were volunteering, social workers, who were keeping tabs on the entire situation. And as we mentioned, women had their cell phones with them in many cases. Even if one woman was able to keep her cell phone hidden with her, she could contact those within our team, within our group, and report on how many total women were being held in her location. So we had a very good sense of how many women were where, in what villages, in what locations, what was happening. And about 5,000 kidnapped people were accounted for by name, and we estimated some buffer of unaccounted abductees beyond that. And we began to work here trying to push for some political action to help free those women. A lot of them still were located in villages near Sinjar Mountain, and they hadn't yet been transported deeper into Syrian and Iraqi territory. We had multiple meetings with the State Department, with people in the Department of Defense, multiple meetings in the White House. A Yazidi delegation came from Iraq of the top religious leadership and tribal leadership of Sinjar. It was a historical moment because it was the first time in history for senior Yazidi leaders to visit Washington and visit officials. We spoke with Benjamin Rhodes in the White House, and everywhere our message was the same. We were pleading with this government to take action by coordinating with Kurdish ground forces that were already active there in the country, and to work with them and empower them through the airstrike program that was already active in order to focus on those communities where large numbers of abducted Yazidis were being held in order to free them. And we felt like this was very doable. A remnant of Yazidis remained up on top of the mountain after the summer's events, including many volunteer fighters who successfully defended that area from IS advances. So even though IS took the city of Sinjar itself and villages all around the mountain, there were a number of locations up on the mountain that were never conquered by IS. And we were asking for additional support for them. They were the front line against IS, and they still are. They're still there today. And the problem was there were no Kurdish reinforcements for them. The Peshmerga were, I'm sorry to say, but busy defending more resource-rich areas with oil, areas near Kirkuk. And this area of Sinjar seemed to be very low priority. So we asked that pressure be applied to the Kurds to send Peshmerga to assist in the rescue of those kidnapped people. And the airstrike program could be used in conjunction with that. And it had already been very effective. It stopped IS in the summer from invading Erbil and from coming into Dohuk, where I was living. The city of Dohuk, IS came within 15 miles of it before Obama ordered the airstrikes. And when he did, it stopped that advance. It was very important. So this action did not take place. And we were heartbroken to sit and watch week after week after week as these groups of women that were being held in villages, we knew where their locations were, as they were taken deeper into Syria into Raqqa, as they mentioned, as far away as Aleppo, deep into Iraq, as far away as Fallujah. And we watched that opportunity slip away. And then in December, the operation we had been begging for, it actually took place. The Peshmerga pushed from Dohuk westward towards Sinjar. They took the areas between the mountain and Dohuk and finally reached the mountain. And this allowed Yazidi fighters that had been on the mountain, as I mentioned, all summer and all fall, defending, to come down and retake villages on the north side of the mountain and the east side of the mountain. Now, this was a bittersweet moment because we were happy that this happened, and yet the opportunity to free all of those abducted people was basically lost. And yet there were still a few locations not too far away where some hostages, some abductees, were held. And during the operation, they were ignored, and nobody went to help those villages. And we were in contact, people in our team were in contact with members of the Peshmerga people in the forces. We were asking them, are you going to go to such and such a village, to this village, are you going to rescue those people? And they would tell us, our commanders have not mentioned hostages. It does not seem to be a priority. So for us, after all of this effort and all of this heartbreak, to see the opportunity slip away, it just added to this trauma. And it was so disheartening. Now, what's happened since then is that a number of the abductees have escaped on their own or been helped, as they've mentioned. And I spoke to a social worker in northern Iraq yesterday morning who keeps tabs on these numbers. His name is Khidr Domli, and you'll see his name in a lot of reports. And he says that the number is now at almost 1,700 people that have escaped or been released. IS released 400, many others have escaped on their own. That's men, women, and children. At least 3,000 more Yazidis still remain in captivity. Now, in terms of where this is going, like I mentioned, those Yazidis on that mountain, they remain the front line of IS. And the resolution to this situation requires regaining stability in that area. Yazidis cannot go home until that happens. As soon as the Sinjar reached the mountain, as soon as the Peshmerga reached Sinjar mountain, there was this kind of declaration that, look, we've liberated Sinjar. That is not true. IS still controls the city of Sinjar itself. There's a mountain of Sinjar, and right south of it is the primary urban center, which is the city of Sinjar, and that is primarily under IS control. Yazidi and PKK-aligned fighters control a little bit of it. That remains the case till today, and most of those fighters are not, they do not have a good working relationship with the Peshmerga, and a lot of this has to do with that sense of betrayal and that sense of abandonment that I mentioned to you. Now, something else that's very important to discuss is the fact that the KDP party, the ruling party of Kurdistan province, President Barzani's party, it is pressuring Yazidi fighters in the mountain to identify as Peshmerga, specifically KDP-affiliated Peshmerga. The Peshmerga are not a unified national army. They are party militias that are loyal to different factions that control different parts of Kurdistan. So you have Peshmerga that are loyal to the KDP party, and Peshmerga that are loyal to the PUK party in Suleimania. So there's a kind of bargaining taking place, political bargaining, where aid is being offered only if Yazidis will acquiesce to the political agenda of the ruling party. And this is a very sick dynamic that is inhibiting the resolution of the situation. And the United States continues to work directly with Kurdistan, which it should, because Kurds are an extremely important ally in the war against terror. But what officials do not realize is that this relationship and the current dynamic will not allow for resolution to take place in Sinjar. For example, one of the key tribal leaders who has been responsible for rallying these Yazidi volunteers and actually defending Sinjar from August until the present without any Peshmerga support, his name is Haider Shesho. He was arrested by the KDP party on April 3rd, earlier this month. April 5th, forgive me, April 5th. And he was held for 9 days. He was detained for 9 days. The reason for his detainment was that he continues to operate a Yazidi militia without using the name Peshmerga, without acquiescing to membership within the KDP. And he was held for 9 days and finally released. And he has since said that he will still not acquiesce to their demand. But what this underscores is the fact that Yazidis are very expendable, according to the current political arrangement. And another problem is that the PUK party of Suleimaniya, they have given some money and some support to Yazidi fighters in Sinjar. So now there's a sense of political competition between the two ruling parties of Kurdistan, and the Yazidis are caught between them. So for Haider to accept aid from the PUK threatens the KDP and brings about this kind of censure that we're experiencing. I mention these things because if there cannot be a healthy way to empower the Yazidis with the aid that they need without subjecting them to these political pressures, then Sinjar is going to remain vulnerable. And people cannot go back home. And it's also going to inhibit the taking of Tal Afar, of Mosul, of those other communities where these abducted women continue to remain. And I believe that those are my main comments, and I will return to any of these issues that you want to discuss during the Q&A. Thank you.
And now we've arrived at that point, the Q&A. Any of you in the audience have any questions? Yes, sir. Would you please give us your name?
Of course. My name is Salat Durati from VOA Kurdish Service. My question goes to each of the members of the panel. So what steps should be taken, concrete steps should be taken to rescue Yazidis from ISIS? What should be done?
Well, as I mentioned before, the time when we really had an opportunity to rescue them through military means, that time is largely past. And those that remain within IS territory are only going to be freed when local people help them escape, or if those areas are retaken by outside military force. So I think that this situation is going to go on for a long time. What I foresee is that we're going to continue to see a slow trickle of people escaping, of Yazidis escaping and making their way back to Kurdistan province. But there's not any kind of major effort that we can engage in to release large numbers, other than covert projects that some people are engaged with that involve negotiating with local Arabs to try to get some of those women out, or men as well. There have been a number of people that have, like they mentioned, risked their lives to help some of those people be freed. There's also been people who are paying ransoms in order to get a lot of those people out. I think that despite the fact that there's not much political solution, we feel hope about working on the humanitarian side with Yazidis that have escaped. So our team, Murad and myself and others, we have shifted really to focus on what kind of services can be provided to the traumatized victims who are making their way back to Kurdistan. There is a tremendous shortage of therapeutic and psychological response for the needs of trauma victims, as well as medical response. That needs to be beefed up. So there needs to be a lot of work with the humanitarian. As far as the political side is concerned, with freeing those people, not a lot of avenues are open. It's very discouraging. What can be done is that officials will pressure Kurdistan and the KDP party and President Barzani, who I heard is coming to Washington this next week, pressure them to change their approach and policy towards the Yazidis, to start empowering the community and their effort to defend Sinjar, regardless of their political allegiances and whatever political program they espouse. Sinjar right now is caught in this vice between the KDP and the PUK and even the PYD in Syria, the Syrian PKK-aligned Kurds. Those Kurds are the only people that really came to Sinjar's aid. I interviewed a number of families this summer who said if it wasn't for the PKK fighters that came in from Syria and helped us evacuate from the mountain, we would have died on the mountain. And so because those communities have helped them, I think the PKK is also kind of laying claim and saying, well, Sinjar should really be part of the Syrian Kurdistan, Rojava, the Syrian Kurdistan. And you can see how the border here has become kind of meaningless, and Sinjar's status as to whether it's going to be part of, you know, the KDP's Kurdistan versus the PYD's Syrian Kurdistan is really up in the air, regardless of Iraqi sovereignty. So that was a little long-winded, but I think that covers a lot. Yeah.
I was just going to echo what Matthew said, that a lot of times, I mean, the services need to be expanded, and a lot of times these women and girls who returned aren't even aware of the services that are available. So the Amnesty International report that Matthew mentioned suggests that these services be physically, geographically, and financially accessible to the women and girls who return, because that is one of the options available now.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I just had a quick question regarding the human trafficking aspect.
Would you give us your name?
Oh, I'm sorry, Chris Matarangas from Fitzpatrick's office. You mentioned that it's turned into a transnational crime in which these transactions are incorporating other countries. I was wondering if there's a third party that was assisting ISIS in this, or are these all ISIS individuals, and are these cash-based transactions?
Can you please repeat the question? So you said.
Yeah, I was just wondering if is there a third party that's assisting with the movement of these individuals?
Oh, okay. So, to say a country that is involved directly, no, but there are some suspicions that countries around Iraq and Syria, some of them are helping ISIL in indirect ways. And you know, looking into ISIL as a terrorist organization that is isolated entirely from the region, that's absolutely not true. Although it's a terrorist organization, but it's also a political organization that has ties with some of the neighboring countries that I think most of you may know if you know the politics of that region. So it's there is some facilitation of ISIL to exist there, and there is facilitation for them also to continue enslaving of the Yazidi women. But I have not heard of any direct transaction by a state that will do that.
Okay. Any sort of criminal organizations?
With the criminal organizations, it will be any terrorist organizations like Nusra. So Nusra and ISIL, those are the two that their name comes up. And when the Yazidi women were getting enslaved, at one instance we heard some of the Nusras to some of the Yazidi women too. But so I'm not sure about any other organization.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, young lady up here.
Yes, my name is Camila Pira. I'm with Congressman Brady's office. And the question was, it seemed that there was a blatant denial on the part of the KPP to recognize that there was this problem. Is the U.S. addressing this, or is this going to be addressed?
Mm-hmm. So the acronym is the KDP.
Okay, sorry.
No problem. And I think that, you know, you have to, there's many layers and levels to this aspect of the situation. So on the one hand, the Kurdish people have been very helpful in responding to the humanitarian crisis on the ground. When Yazidi refugees came into Kurdistan province, local people came out and fed them, put them into their homes, tried to find empty buildings where they could stay. Most people just inhabited empty schools and so forth. However, on the governmental level, it was a very different reality. So one of the things that really incensed the Yazidis was that President Barzani referred to this campaign as a Kurdish genocide. And as my interviews with survivors from the mountain showed, Kurds that were Muslims were not targeted by this violence. It was specifically Yazidis that were targeted on the basis of their religion. So to call it a Kurdish genocide was in a way trying to reappropriate the sympathy and political capital that such an event generates for Kurdistan in general as a way to get support. And that has been the pattern all along, is, well, we would love to help our minorities, but you guys need to support us more, we need weapons and everything. I believe Kurdistan does need weapons. I believe the U.S. should support Kurdistan. It is a front line in this conflict. But it's a myth that they're actually valuing these minorities to the extent that they actually expend much effort to protect them. And that's what has not been acknowledged. In terms of whether or not the U.S. has dealt with that, with the Kurdish leadership, I'm unaware of anything, if anything has, and that's one of the things we've wanted for such a long time. We've wanted the U.S. to bring this issue to the forefront and to pressure them. When Yazidi leaders like Vian Dakhil come, she's the sole Yazidi representative in the Kurdish parliament for the Yazidis. when they come and speak in the U.S., she came in October and spoke at a congressional hearing that Senator Barbara Boxer organized. The message that they usually present is that the best way to help Yazidis is to support Kurdistan, support the Kurds with weapons. And I have a lot of respect for Ms. Dakhil for the work she's done to help the refugees and the crisis. But at the same time, that message is very offensive to 99% of Yazidi people. They do not view their own political elites as legitimate representatives of their political interests, because those leaders are considered co-opted. You don't become a Yazidi political leader in Kurdistan without becoming a member of the KDP party and then articulating a KDP agenda. So no one on the political level is really speaking for the interests of Yazidis in general. And I say this with all respect to Vianne Dakhil. She's done a lot of wonderful work for the Yazidis, but there's still this discrepancy in the political message that is not addressed. And American officials do not understand this because they hear the Yazidi case presented through that kind of mouthpiece.
Maybe I will add something to that. I mean, that's absolutely right that even for Yazidis and for Christian, both minorities in Iraq, they are not really allowed to practice anything political outside the regime, outside the KDP regime. If just for the past couple of days, there was some conversation to form a Yazidi political bloc to push for the agendas of the Yazidi people, but those leaders were put in prison. And Yazidi activists, 44 Yazidi activists were put in prison. So as a US, once we support some party in the Middle East, we have to ensure that they follow the democracy. They should allow others to exist, especially for people who've been subject to genocide. And that's some leverage that we can practice to pressure the KRG that Yazidis, Christian, and other minorities should have the ability to practice politics. They should have the ability to control themselves, should have the ability to be representing themselves. That's what we need from the US over the long term.
And yet, the US administration is understandably reluctant to arm minority groups directly, because history shows how many problems ensue from that kind of policy. So when the British armed the Assyrians and they used them in the Assyrian levies in the 1930s, it engendered a lot of animosity, and the state ended up committing a lot of violence against Christians. So every group that feels like it's just them and IS, them facing the world, they want weapons and they want support, and I believe they should have it. I believe that if the only way to prevent Yazidis from being exterminated is to arm them in Sinjar, if the state forces are absent, the very state apparatus that's supposed to protect them is not there, then I believe they should be armed. And yet our administration is reluctant to take that policy because it contradicts the policy of United Iraq. And I understand that. It's very dangerous to arm every single ethnic group. But that shouldn't stop them from finding a way to move forward and in some way that will create security for Yazidis, because this political fragmentation is allowing people to fall through the cracks.
How many Yazidis, to the extent that we know, I'm not talking about hostages, but actual people that are Yazidis, there or in the diaspora?
No, so Yazidis are about 1 million people, from 1 million worldwide, and then in Iraq about 500,000 to 600,000, from which about 400,000 live in Sinjar, which is the homeland of Yazidis, and other 200 in Nineveh plain.
Okay.
From the abuse and the violence, and if so, I'm curious as to whether or not the violence against women is solely political, or if it has some kind of religious explanation. It's like a innate understanding that women are subordinate, whereas all women would be subjugated, or is it specifically Yazidi women for the theological discrepancy in the political situation?
So thank you for the question. The all-female brigades, the women who are in those brigades are exempt from the violence. They're the ones who are responsible for making sure that women are dressed according to what they see as Sharia law in place in the Islamic State. And for that reason, it's not subjugating women specifically because they're Yazidis. They're not the ones who are perpetrating the rape and other crimes like that against those who are subjugated. It's all women who live in Raqqa and the other areas that are controlled by these brigades. So they're the perpetrators of violence, but only to fulfill the ideals of the Islamic State.
In terms of the theological justification for enslaving Yazidi women in particular, the jihadists believe that because the Yazidis are a non-Islamic and non-people of the book minority, meaning they're not an Abrahamic religion with a received scriptural tradition, like Judaism or Christianity, that because they're that kind of group, they also perceive them as polytheistic, that gives them the right to subjugate them to enslavement. This is something that they haven't done in a systematic way to any other community in the same way, because they believe that other communities have certain types of rights under Islamic law that the Yazidis do not qualify for.
No? All right, ladies and gentlemen, certainly let's give a round of applause. It's a wealth of information that has been provided to us. We've had the significance of the problem highlighted and several suggestions as to potential resolution. Regrettably, it is an extremely complex region of the world, as is the complexities ongoing in the world. One of the things that my colleagues and I, of like mind, continue to say is that somewhere along the line, the United States Congress needs to step up and make a determination after the President has asked for the authorization of the use of military force. There has been nothing done here in the Congress by way of action on that request, either to modify it, change it, reject it, nothing. And that leads to the added problems. Matt, when I hear you talk from personal information, you and Murad and Kendra, and the academic part of it, the humanitarian part of it, the diplomatic part of it, and military, when I hear you talk, and I'm reduced to just the areas that you mentioned, it does not deliberately ignore, but it does leave faint recognition of the near abroad that comes into play, need I say, when you use the term Kurdistan. If we were in a room with a lot of people from Turkey, that may rankle some of them. And then there is something that, two things I wish to say to the audience here, particularly the staffers from other congresspersons, deeply appreciative that you all are here. And toward that end, I would hope that all of us understand that there are other players, and by that I mean nation states, countries, that have an awful lot at stake in the region of the world that we are discussing, not just that little portion, but in all of that area. I get very little discussion and feedback from my colleagues when I mention Russia's role in Syria. It kind of like is difficult for them to understand how long Russia has been involved with Syria and how much intermarriage has taken place between Syrians and Russians, and why the warm water port is of such critical significance to them. I could go on and on. I won't even bother to bring Iran into play, but that needs to be understood. And some of the indirect funding, that question was raised, comes again from the near abroad, that adds to the complications that we're dealing with. I must share this story that was one of my most disappointing moments in travel around the world. Was my third time to Iraq. Nancy Pelosi was Speaker of the House of Representatives, and I went with her. And I asked Maliki what were his intentions regarding the persons that had been displaced from Iraq. This is before we get to any of these issues of the day. His statement